And thank you for getting me here. And this is going to be a very interesting panel talking about the city and the relationship between urban development and fragmentation, urban fragmentation. And the subject is very interesting, and I think it's what is also very interesting to have this guest. We are very well-known guest. And I would like to introduce them. Leandro Erlich is an artist based in Buenos Aires in Montevideo. And many of his performances are related with city and how the relationship of public space and his performances. Also, we have Charles Renfro, architect from Diller, Scofidio and Renfro office based in New York and very well known for all his works all around the world. And Terence, also architect, professor, and curator, and museum director, etc. So also a long background related with art and architecture, based here in Miami. And when I received an invitation to come here, the idea was to organize this conversation in the relationship between urban growth, development, and fragmentation, but not only physical fragmentation, but also social marginalization and community stigmatization. So in which way both condition of urban development and urban opportunities also is bringing at the same time this dichotomical situation of segregation of places and communities. So I would like to start asking you if you could see this relationship between development and fragmentation and segregation, and in which way this is something that could be planned or could be understood from the very beginning in one of your projects. So maybe because I'm the curator, I would like to start with Charles, your project related with Highline Park, in which way this project that transformed a huge part of New York City also brought a kind of fragmentarian condition, but not only in terms of physical situation, but more or less in people who are not being involved or they are not feeling that they are part of this transformation process.
Sure. Wow, this does work. So one thing I'll say generally is that new development more often than not, if it's successful, spawns gentrification. Gentrification causes property values to rise. Rising property values often impacts local indigenous residents in negative ways. It's just the way things go. And so just to start the discussion, I think I would like to ponder, should we as architects and urbanists wish that our projects would fail more in order to succeed in keeping the local populations involved? Okay, having said that, that's just a little provocation. The High Line passes through 5 really distinct neighborhoods, 2 of which have some of New York City's most successful low-income housing projects that Robert Moses put up. But they're actually quite cohesive and have very low crime. And while the line itself has been a huge success in terms of visitorship, we had 7.4 million visitors last year. That's more than the Metropolitan Museum. And it's been certainly super influential in terms of spurring development. We have something like $8 billion worth of development on the line itself, just directly on the line. It has also succeeded in driving away the businesses that support those 2 low-income neighborhoods. And therefore, there's been a lot of soul-searching in retrospect, after the completion of the line, as to whether more care should have been taken from the very beginning to safeguard the interests of those low-income residents. And I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I think it's just a way to sort of illustrate one of the issues that the panel is intended to speak about.
I think what is interesting is that the urban fragmentation is not happening in the place, but it's kind of a huge game in the city where something that is going on in one part of the city is producing a reaction in another part of the city.
Sure.
And mainly because of displacement of people who are used to live in one place with a social connection are being moved because this gentrification process. So Terence, what do you think about that? There is a way that could be anticipate this social segregation or social gentrification in order to act not only in the place that the project is being developed, but also in the place where all these people are going to be relocated or they are going to be moved?
I can jump in here too. I lived in Chelsea for many of the years before there was any art in Chelsea. It was a different place. The neighborhood has gentrified. Gentrified has a very negative connotation, but I don't think any urban planner has an interest in preserving substandard sort of urban conditions. And what's interesting about Chelsea is it has gentrified, but what I find much more devious is these real estate, Soho was its history was, sort of self-invented. It was an underused area of town. Artists moved in, artists basically took over, gallerists moved in, etc. And it was all about building a kind of art world. And now this formula has been adopted by very, I think, devious real estate people who are looking for an instantaneous transformation using artists, using galleries to pretty up a neighborhood with every intention of, as soon as possible, taking the most profit and driving all the artists out. And it's turned into almost a formula that we see over and over again. Happened here in Miami. Wynwood, there's barely a gallery left there. And in terms of Chelsea and the High Line, I mean, I do think there are some disaffected people about the High Line that live there. But Charles, it's because they can't walk their dogs on the High Line. It's why there's all tourists there and no locals. So use your influence so that people can walk their dogs there, and then it'll be much better part of the neighborhood. But the whole Upper West Side was a gentrification process that began with Lincoln Center. Any of you have seen West Side Story? It's about gang warfare. That was the Upper West Side. There used to be a saying, when you leave Lincoln Center, never turn left, because quite frankly, the Upper West Side was not hospitable. So it's become what it's become, but it's become what it is, I would say, when was Lincoln Center built?
First phase opened in 59.
So it's like a 50-year process, and I think in a retrospective look, there has been displacement, but it hasn't been this sudden, horrible kind of displacement. And I think that there's even an argument to be made that certain residents actually benefited from this sort of slowly rising tide. I don't know what you do about the other, I mean, I feel sorry for the artists, I feel sorry for the gallery people who put all the effort into transforming Wynwood into a vibrant part of the city and now have virtually no place there.
Coming from art perspective, if this displacement is breaking down the social links that exist in the community and also in how the community is linked with the rest of the city, how do you think art could be acting in this way to performance, or to try through the performance, try to relink this connection that has been breaking down?
Well, first, before answering that question, I think that listening to the questions and the answers and the reflections makes me think, okay, we are trying to analyze something very specifically, from a very specific point of view. And I think that all the gentrification of the neighborhood, I think that is it's impossible to think the urban development or fragmentation without considering where is this happening in a global economical sphere. I think that fragmentation, unfortunately, in the urban fragmentation is inherent to the dynamic of the economic dynamic of real estate, for instance. So the growth of the city is pushing something, how to say, it's something that forces us to look for solutions which are not quite easy to grasp because are part of a larger system. And in that regard, I think that art has a benefit in relation to architecture, which is escapes in public space because it escapes from the functional order. So there's no function for the art which is there to solve a human need, specifically neither an economic system which a developer will consider. So art maybe becomes, from my point of view, an excuse, a good excuse for people, and a very democratic one, because actually public space, art in public space will be very it could be a very interesting and democratic tool to create accessibility and actually there are cities in like Paris and places in Japan where art has been instrumented as a way to of creating links between people and integrating areas where the city is kind of socially falling out of the plate of the city.
But don't you also think that when you say urban fragmentation, even the wealthier classes exist in urban fragmentation? It seems to be our signature sort of style. There was a mayor of Barcelona, I'm trying to remember his name. He was mayor when they built the Museum of Contemporary Art and sort of other projects. And I remember him saying, we can't integrate the historic city with the suburbs. The most we can hope for is to make the suburbs legible. And I thought there was something interesting in that. I think I know what he didn't mean. He didn't mean roundabout art that we see, committees pick plop art, but I mean on the scale of the automobile turnaround, roundabout. So I think I'm looking for as many answers here as I have opinions. So,
yep.
Can I just comment on both of these? I think we have to actually back up and ask: is fragmentation bad?
No, that's what
because I think
that's
the way
what
that
I tried to say.
Yeah, I think the way the
not
question was asked, I assumed it was sort of a negative question.
No, yeah.
Whereas I think fragmentation is probably what we should hope for. Actually, yeah. Heterogeneity is the way cities form an ecosystem and a vibrancy. The last thing we need in this day and age, especially, are enclaves of just like-minded people and socioeconomic consistency. And I do also want to say one thing about art, because this bugs me, that art is the savior of everyone. Put art in the city, fantastic, it's democratic, everybody will love it. Well, really? I mean, does everybody love art?
No, not really. Actually, actually, it's true. And actually, I think that there is something that I truly believe that art should be, I don't know if everybody loves art. I think it's a matter of, it could be an open conversation. I think that is a problem when someone makes a decision of something that has to be there and without, like an imposition. But also relating to what you said about fragmentation, I think that the only reason why I consider for a moment as a negative term is because I link it to opposite to integration. And I think that there is a matter of, that's why I think that what it matters to me, I think, is, and what is really a challenge, a social challenge, is a matter of integration.
I mean, in my architecture studio that I'm teaching this semester, we're doing a project in the, it's Cerro San Cristobal in Lima. It's a slum, a favela, informal city, whatever you want to call it, on a very beautiful mountainside. And these, of course, these communities grow without regulation. They have, everybody is putting every drop of sweat and possession into creating a very basic kind of life. But what's interesting is it's now about 40 years old, and there's two places, there's nothing that could be called public space in a sense. But there are two places where there were trees growing, and no one has ever touched those trees. No one has ever touched the space around them. So it sort of proves your point on one level, is that even in the most extreme circumstances where functionality, survival, etc., are the rule of the day, people recognize and value certain things more than just what they're going to eat that day. And I think that, Art Basel art, it's hard for me to think of that art that's in the convention center as a tool, as being instrumental to creating a more cohesive society, or even within a group. But on a fundamental level, people understood the importance of these trees. And so I don't know how you would tap into that unspoken respect for the trees. And I don't know how you would, I think it can be done. You're probably more experienced at it. How do you?
Look, I'm going to tell as short as I can a project I did in Buenos Aires. By the way, the High Line is one of the expressions where actually people are incorporating within let's say, a function in the city that is something like the tree that you were saying, This, in Buenos Aires, and about people loving art, I don't think that the love is necessarily, is one of the human emotions, but there are many others. And the one I like is the idea of awakening people's, process of thinking, questioning, and things don't have to be necessarily an imposition. I did a project in Buenos Aires 2 years ago. In the city, there's the city's and probably the country's main monument is an obelisk, which is 70 meters high. It's a little bit like the Washington obelisk. And for every porteño, the people from Buenos Aires, since ever, we have been looking at this obelisk. It has been obviously very polemic at the time when it was built in the 30s, and as a monument that was commemorating the foundation of the city and so on. But the obelisk has 4 little windows in the epics, but everybody wonder, how is this, what can you see from there? Actually, everybody has this dream about climbing in this obelisk. Accessibility. This is something that happened in the Eiffel Tower, in the Statue of Liberty, in every main monument in the cities in the world. In these iconic monuments, there's a sense of appropriation by actually getting into and being able to be appropriated. The city of Buenos Aires has this obelisk, which was built not to be visited. I always thought that there was an elevator inside. The thing is, I came up with this idea of making a project, which was, I call it the democracy of the symbol. And I went up in the obelisk with the permission of the city. I recorded with a high-definition camera the view from the 4 windows. And then I create a replica of the apex, and I keep it in my studio. Until the day, one night, I built, a cover that installed with a crane. It made look one Sunday morning without any anticipation, no announcement. It looked like the obelisk lost its apex. Basically, what I have done is to build, in the 70 meters, I had to build only 4 meters, a continuation, and I stop. So the image, when you see it, it looks like the obelisk lost its apex. So I kind of circumcised the obelisk, and I place the apex in the front, and I place it in the entrance of the museum in Buenos Aires. And everybody was part of the discussion. Actually, no one knew about it, and people was like, I took a taxi. We finished the installation at 6 in the morning. This is the photo. And I don't know if there is a photo of the project inside, but everybody, I took a taxi 6 in the morning, and the taxi driver was telling me, everybody has an opinion about it. Like, no. I was playing like, what happened? I saw it last night. They took the apex down for restoration. Oh, really? Weird. I mean, I didn't know you can do that. And then another one said, someone said, you know what? These people are so corrupt, they even steal the apex of the obelisk. Like, everybody has an opinion. There was part of so that's, for me, what art could be about. And the project, and then, of course, the television was like they're sending drones to prove that David Copperfield didn't actually, was what was happening with the obelisk, that it's still there too. And that was the news of the day. And then, the thing is that it was not permanent. It doesn't have to be permanent. But it remained, yeah.
I think what is interesting, what you're talking about, is this trying to provoke the relationship between spaces through different dialogues. So people start to talk about things that is happening in other places in order to, so there's 2 ways to produce integration, I think.
And there is no, it's exactly as you said, and also there's no, in this case, there's no matter, the social integration comes from a subject, from an excuse in which everybody has an opinion, everybody can come with an opinion about it.
I think there's 2 ways that you explain in this dialogue between differences in different places. And also I found another interesting issue that it's happening in another way in the Lincoln place, where you bring people together in the same place. They're not, so you are opening the other way around, a place that has been recognized as a kind of elite or a very well-known, so you change the situation, and also you create a different way of approaching to the place. So there's not anymore just related to some elite art performance, but also a way where people can meet and can recognize as part of this also place. So what's your...
Well, we like to think that almost all of our work is democratic, and I sort of shudder when I use that term because that always suggests that people have voted on whether or not they want it or not. But what we tried to do with Lincoln Center, which was built in the 50s when there was a white flight from the cities and cities were dangerous, and it was built as a fortress, an acropolis surrounded by stone, it said, do not enter. In fact, the way that it was set up, literally set up, was so that cars would take the fewest turns coming from Westchester to get into the parking garage. It was literally built as a commuter destination. And so there are 2 very famous schools right behind it, a junior high and a high school, both dedicated to the arts. And yet, they had security guards that were batting the students off of the stairs so that they wouldn't enter Lincoln Center proper before we renovated. So all we did was simply take away all the stone as much as we could. We put a lot of glass in. We widened the stairs. We integrated media, which immediately, no pun intended, drew in a younger crowd, people that were used to dealing with pixels, and we made places on the campus that were actually just pleasant to be in. It had been built at the height of sort of dystopian city making, with empty plazas and barren empty plazas, and we just simply sort of turned that around. And we told them to let the students go in the campus, and they did. And so now we can't change anything about whether you can buy a ticket to see shows there, but we certainly tried to make a lot more available free of charge for a lot more people than was before the renovation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting also, to change the meaning of the space. So how the people recognize. So then things happen and most of the time unplanned. So it's a kind of a provoking a reaction and an open reaction and a planned reaction to recover the relationship between people and place or space. And how you could compare with what is happening here in Miami? It's also the way how the places are recognized, or?
Well, I think Miami's got a very interesting recent history. Miami oscillates between thinking it has the best climate in the world and thinking it has the worst climate in the world. In the 70s, everything was mirrored glass. Everything was a mall. It was air conditioned. Nobody was on the street. We're living in a time now where most of the best restaurants have most of their seats outside. I mean, it's sort of been rediscovered. Typically, there's no Central Park, but there is the beach, and the beach is very democratic in that sense, unless you're overweight, when things change. But Miamians were very used, you could almost say their social center was either the beach or their backyard. And I honestly believe that the city began to change around the hotels. The hotels, let's not call them democratic in a sense, but they have the appearance and the practice of acting as public space. And when all those hotels on South Beach became social spaces where you didn't have to stay there to go there, and you could be part of this scene, I actually think it began to cultivate a taste for public space. I mean, I really do. And they fought we built the art museum and then the science museum in this park downtown, which was really nobody went there. It was just badly designed, and accessibility was a huge issue. There was no place to park. There was no place. There was very little ways of enjoying it, and we thought a lot about accessibility. And those of you who have been there know that you don't have to actually buy a ticket and go inside the museum to feel like you're participating. There's something like 50,000 square feet of exterior space. And I remember one of the first days that the museum was actually functioning, some teenage boys, they had bicycles, so they were probably under 16, were walking their bikes. They'd been told not to ride their bikes under the canopy, and they got to the ocean, to the bay, and they looked at each other, and I heard them say, "This is cool." And do you know how hard it is to get a 16-year-old interested in a museum? I mean, and to have them voluntarily showing up saying it's cool? Well, this actually corresponds to one of my theories about how to program a museum, and it's my Holden Caulfield theory. Holden Caulfield, the principal character in Catcher in the Rye, has been expelled from his boarding school. He hasn't gone home yet. He's caught between the two teenage institutions, school and home. He's been kicked out of school. His parents are not going to be happy. He wanders around Manhattan for as long as he can. He goes to a bar. He visits a prostitute. And he goes to Central Park. And he goes to 2 museums. And obviously the bar, the prostitute, here he's trying to imagine what it's like to be an adult. What is that going to be like? And he's looking for spaces where he might find adulthood in a way. But what I love is he goes to 2 museums. And the reason he goes is because the entry barrier is very low. Once you know, I remember the first time I went into a museum, I watched people go in and out. And at a certain point I said, well, if they're not going to stop me, I'm going to go in. And I was probably 14 or 15. And so once I knew how to go in, what I loved was nobody told you what to do. If I had to report to an education department and they would tell me what I was supposed to do in the museum, I would have probably never gone back. What I loved was nobody cared what I wanted to do. And you got to see naked men and women, and everyone thought you were a wonderful kid, you know?
I mean, I wonder about museums. I mean, we work on a lot of them too, and recently we're working on one for Brussels that will be partly run by the Pompidou, and it's right on the edge of Molenbeek, which is where a lot of the terrorists that have made news recently grew up, and it has really caused us to think a lot about how to design a museum and who are we appealing to. What activities happen in there? Whose art is it? Why would anybody come in? And in a way, I think if we put a basketball court in the middle of the museum, or I don't know, and I don't want to sound like I'm pandering to any particular set of people, but simply, if I think about leisure, sport is leisure to a lot of people, the same way art is leisure to a lot of people, or it's also communal, and it's also about society. And so I think museums can do more than just art, and not lose their credibility as art institutions. And I think we should be thinking about that.
I think museums should do less. We have this entirely over-programmed generation, and we're, as adults, are over-programmed, and we keep thinking the way to salvation is to give people more things to do. I mean, one of my favorite spaces in the National Gallery, there's 2 of them. There's the courtyard, there's no art there. Well, it's just like the sun's there. And after looking at 8 centuries of art, it's really nice to walk into that space and not have it really be programmed.
Yeah, but I think also it's bringing a kind of new opportunities. I think the best place, not the best place, but one of the places that I like more is the square before going into the Pompidou area. I think all these kind of places that are unplanned and are people where they can do whatever they want, and to organize a kind of an open performance, and I think this is something that is related to the Pompidou, but at the same time is understood from the city behavior.
But it's also, I mean, it's like the canopy area at PAM. By the time everyone's having fun, they realize they're actually halfway into the museum. And it's this thing about accessibility is drop the barrier lower and lower and lower, and in the neighborhood you're talking about, museum going is not probably but is whatever those teenagers liked about PAM under the canopy on top of the whatever that was, they did like. And they didn't find it odd at all to find themselves there. And then they found themselves within a few feet of going in. Well,
just one more question before going to the open question. I think it's the relationship between the urban violence and
urban what?
Violence.
Oh.
You talk a little bit about the violence here in Miami, New York, and Buenos Aires. Of course, the 3 of us, we used to live in places. And I don't know how you feel public space and this opportunity to bring people together. Also, it's a way how to reduce the violence, is to promote the violence. How do you think it's?
I'm just going to say one little thing. We on Highline. I'm sorry that other people's slides aren't flashing up, but anyway, it's there. The Parks Department is officially running the park, although it's run by a separate agency. We put glass rails in the park. It was the first time a New York park had glass handrails. All of our light stops at 3 feet. It's the first park that's not lit with floodlights in some way or other. We had to convince them that this was not unsafe. And in fact, there are virtually no violent incidents on the park. There's no graffiti on the park. We assumed there would be scratchiti on the glass. Yeah. It does close at 11, so there's control mechanism there for sure. But my kind of one-liner is that if you respect the public will respect each other back. Yeah. And I think that that's what we need to strive for in our public space making. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I was caught off guard a little bit by the question. One of Miami's recent great cultural productions was a movie called Moonlight, and it was produced by or directed by a man using the neighborhood of Lemon City, which was as hard as you saw in the movie. I mean, it was what it was. And it's turned Lemon City into a tourist destination. I don't know how that is going to work out. But in the design district, many years ago, when Craig Robbins first started developing it, he paid some local artists to do this installation. It was called The Living Room. Does anybody remember The Living Room on Miami Avenue? It was at the very edge of what was a seedy neighborhood at the time. It was at the very outside edge of it. It was never vandalized. It was never, ever, ever vandalized. And it was only vandalized after someone put a fence around it. And this leads to your point. You disrespect, you treat people like they're going to commit a crime, and they're very happy to do it for you. Yeah. And the other thing here is there's lots of Latin Americans, rich Latin Americans, who come here to buy these very expensive condos. And I am tangentially, as an architect, I know the developers, I know these projects, things like that. And these are in the poshest neighborhoods, on the beach. And there's a certain Latin American that won't buy unless there is gates and security boxes and all of this stuff. They don't feel okay unless they see these things that they see at home. Because in certain neighborhoods in say, Sao Paulo, you can have a favela next to a gated community. So it's like it's reversed. Expecting crime, you barricade yourself inside, and whether it happens or not, you have turned yourself into a kind of prisoner.
Yeah. Also, I think that I agree completely with what you're saying. Actually, in a way, to put a fence is it's a violent action. But I read somewhere a sociologist that link two interesting things about education and violence. One of those was education as teaching. I mean, through education, you know how to express yourself verbally, right? But if you don't have the tool developed to express yourself verbally, what happens to you? I mean, immediately you have a sense of you're discussing something with someone and you cannot express yourself. You cannot make the point. You cannot, and then immediately that generates violence, and then maybe you act violently. And the other thing is about the children games and the development of the new in the new technologies. Most of the games are focused on games that are developing a side of the brain which is linked to reaction. Many games are about like how, it's like how fast you can escape, you can avoid like a bullet or something like this. And less games are like chess, which is our type of games that articulate a process of reflection, not immediate reaction, but a process of thinking before the action. So this, taking both issues, the games or the process of education, I think that culture has a lot to do with that. I think culture and education is a tool to fight violence.
I'm sorry, I have to stop
Yes.
it. We are a little bit out of time,
Yes.
so it's time for open questions from the audience. Yeah. You have it.
Hi. Hello? Yeah. You mentioned that in your studies in the university are doing a work in Lima, in one of the Villa Miseria, I suppose, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
You mentioned that you are working in Lima, in Villa Miseria, I suppose.
Slums.
Slums.
Yes.
Slum. Okay. Is there any physical effect when you do a study there to help the people in the local community?
I should say this is a university studio project, so we're not doing physical work, but we are working with the city of Lima. They made the introduction between me, Manuel Clavel Rojo is the other professor, and the students. They introduced us to the community leaders. And, to talk about what that area needs is to make a list, this long. There's no access by, no police car, no ambulance, no garbage truck, no fire truck. Nothing can enter this neighborhood. A lot of people talk about self-built communities in a positive way. Well, this is a self-built community, but everybody can only take care of their part. So it's a very difficult problem. One student is introducing, her proposal is greenhouses because the site faces the sunny part, to introduce greenhouses where they can grow. All these people came from the countryside. They all used to know how to farm. They all used to have a relationship to the soil and the seasons. And her proposal is to introduce these greenhouses so that in addition to working, people can actually do a certain level of subsistence farming, but also sell produce to all the restaurants and things like that. Some of the students are focusing on infrastructure. Some of the students are focusing more on what you would call, they're not physical comforts, they're more psychic comforts. More trees, more open areas.
I think we have just a couple of minutes before we have to finish, so maybe...
Really? We're having so much fun.
One more question over there. Yeah. Oh,
Have to take it outside.
I'm sorry.
Well, to continue the fun, going back to the gentrification issue, I wonder if you have any examples of cities which have reacted to the possibility of the damage of gentrification for the artists and for the art galleries. Have there been special measures and bylaws and so on, incentives for developers to maintain a certain, rental bracket for those people so that you don't chase the original attractors?
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's actually...
That's an excellent question. I'm going to let Terry answer.
But you may have a better example than I do, but I know that in the neighborhoods where the art galleries from Wynwood have gone, they have not received a very warm welcome exactly, consistently, because the people that live in those neighborhoods, they do see this as a threat because they see exactly what happened in Wynwood. And I don't know if anything is going to come of that, but when political pressure is put upon elected leaders by organized people, you may think that perhaps they would pass some measures to stabilize. And I also think it's important for the artists and the galleries to not be so arrogant to immediately assume that whatever they're doing is going to make everybody happy, and look what we're doing to help your neighborhood, but actually sit down with people and try to work those things out.
One thing I'll say is, cities in Northern Europe that are more sort of socialist and not the developers, there are often collaborative developments with city and development groups with limited profit margins. These cities have done a much better job of maintaining a kind of mid-income residential population. Whether artists or not, I don't know. That's hard to guarantee and dictate. But there are models of the way we can make cities more responsibly.
Yeah.
Very short. Actually,
For me,
yes, no, because I am an artist and I have to fight for the. But the thing is, actually, I think that once the place gets too expensive for the artist, just go somewhere else. I mean, the artist. I mean, we fight. We all are aiming for for comfort, but art is not good comfort for the art. It's not good for the. I think it's good the virus. It's good to struggle sometimes. It's good to find solutions, and then you have to find a challenge, and so it's okay.
Yeah,
I think it's part of the dynamic that is maybe not bad to.
Well, I think the four of us have our own ideas how we can deal with the gentrification, and I think we could go on talking after because we need to end now. We want to.
Wait. How about if we continue? Raise hands who.
You can do it, but I need to close it.
Just for one second, okay.
I'm sorry, we can go outside with a coffee. Thank you very much.